you check out the description down below. There will be a free PDF for you, and I have 10, yes, 10 different spooky faces that you can download to make your own Halloween applique. So for myself, I did my applique on this fun quilt here, which will be in this tutorial. But if you don't want to make a big project like a quilt, even though this one is a small quilt, it's still a lot of extra effort. You can definitely add it onto my table runner tutorial, which I will link in the description down below. And of course, if you just want to see how I did the spooky faces, then just skip on forward. I will have a timestamp where I just go over how I did the spooky faces themselves. All right, now let's jump into this spooky tutorial. For this quilt, you will choose 2 of the spooky faces from the free PDF download. You will also need 2 different fabrics as well. So I just wanted to do a white and a black fabric. So both of my fabrics are cut at 1.5 yards of fabric. And then you will also need some Heat and Bond Light or Heat and Bond Feather Light. Either one will work great to add your applique to your project. You will also need 2 yards of batting and 2 yards of backing fabric, as well as around a 1/4 yard of fabric for your binding. Now, of course, up that for the binding and the backing fabric if you are going to make your quilt larger and add extra strips. You will cut the same amount of strips from the black fabric as you do from the white fabric. For myself, I found it easiest to fold my fabric so that the selvages were together, and then I folded it in half one more time. Of course, trimming off that outer edge so you have a nice straight line. And then you will cut a 9-inch section, and then a 3.5-inch section, a 3-inch, a 2.5, a 2-inch, and then a 1.5. And of course, if you want your quilt to be a bit larger, then you can always add to that. So you could also add a 4-inch strip or a 4.5-inch strip. Once you have all of your strips of fabric cut out, then you'll grab the 2 9-inch sections and you will pin those together and sew them at 1/4 inch so that they're nicely together. And then you will also grab all of your strips and you will mix them up in a special order. So you still want all of your strips to go from 3.5 to 3-inch, 2.5, 2-inch, and then 1.5. You're just going to go every other with the color and then sew those strips together as well. So you'll end up with 2 panels with the multicolor strips and then 1 panel with the 2 9-inch strips sewn together. Once you have all 3 panels, then just turn them over and press all of your seams open. Then you can put all 3 of these panels aside because now it's time to applique. The first thing you'll do is grab the 2 faces that you've chosen for your quilt, and we are going to cut out all of the individual pieces. One very important thing to remember when you are doing applique is that applique ends up reversed when you put it on your project. So when you're tracing it on your Heat and Bond, it's going to look one way, and then you're going to transfer it onto your fabric and it will look the reverse of what you've been looking at. So that might matter if you're cutting half pieces like what I did here, or if you really like the crooked smile one way and you didn't want it the other way. Keep that in mind. And now that you've cut out all of the face pieces, grab some white and some black fabric that you have left over from when you were cutting all of your strips, and you can use that for your applique. Now for myself, I actually have smaller scraps, so I'm going to use these. And of course, you can do the same if you also have some extra scraps in the same colors. Now, because our quilt is half white and half black, your face also needs to be half white and half black. So what you'll do is you will cut straight down the center of the nose, or however you want the nose to be situated on your quilt, and you'll do the same for the mouth. Now it is going to depend where you are going to put your applique on your quilt. I put one on either end of my quilt, which means the left half of one face is going to need to be white, and then the right half of the other face is going to need to be white. So make sure you're pulling the correct pieces and then just place them on your scrap piece of fabric to make sure that you have enough space for all of those pieces. Once you know how much scrap fabric you're going to need, then you can use that scrap fabric and lay it on top of some of the heat and bond. You will first attach the heat and bond to the back of your scrap fabric. You should be able to tell which side is the right side just by feeling the heat and bond. One side will feel like smooth paper, the other side will feel like rough, dried glue. So that rough, dried glue you will lay towards your fabric, and then you will press it onto your scrap fabric. And now it's time to lay all of your pieces on top of the paper part of the heat and bond, and you can trace it all out. I just traced it out with pencil, and then you can start cutting it all out. I, for the most part, enjoyed cutting all of my pieces out with a pair of scissors, but I do also have this small little rotary cutter blade that is also incredibly helpful when it comes to applique. I will have that linked in the description down below if you're interested in purchasing that. Quick interruption here. If you are enjoying this tutorial and you are looking for more Halloween projects, I have a whole playlist and I have that linked in the description down below. So definitely check that out and hit the subscribe button if you don't want to lose me on YouTube. All right, let's continue sewing. All right, so you can see here I have cut out all of the pieces that I need for my applique, and I'm making sure, of course, that the nose and the mouth lines up nicely. Now, to attach the pieces to our quilt, you're going to grab your center panel, the one with the two 9-inch sections sewn together. And then for myself, I just measured 9 inches up from the bottom, and that is where the bottom of my mouth is going to lay. Then you will peel off the backing paper off of all of your fabric pieces and then lay them where you want them on your panel and press them in place. Now it's time to sew our applique onto our fabric. So take it to your sewing machine and you can do some different stitches. So you could do a straight stitch if you wanted. You could try to match your thread up so that it's not seen, or you could do opposite thread so that it is seen. I liked the idea of having my thread shown on a Halloween project. So I actually did black thread on the white fabric. You could do a zigzag stitch, you could do a blanket stitch. It really is up to you. And you will go all the way around the entire face. Now, if you've never sewn around jagged edges before, especially using something like a blanket stitch, I do suggest practicing on a separate piece of fabric before sewing on your actual project. This is the first time I used a blanket stitch on a project, and when you end up down in that bottom corner and turning, you definitely need to end up with the needle in a specific spot, and same with when you end up on those outer points. So like I say, just practice on a separate piece of fabric before you start stitching all of your applique onto your quilt backing. And as you can see on this classic pumpkin face here, I used the blanket stitching. And then on Jack's face, I did just a normal zigzag stitch. Jack's mouth is smaller and has more little corners and finicky pieces, so I didn't want to be fiddling around with the blanket stitch on that particular face. And this is what the applique looks like when you are done. I think that doing the opposite threads and the half face applique just gives it such a fun and spooky look. Now that the center panel has been appliqued, it's time to add the two side panels onto it. So make sure that the 3.5-inch strip of fabric is lined up with the 9-inch strip of fabric, and of course the opposite colors. Pin that together and sew that at 1/4 inch seam allowance, pressing that seam open, and then do the same for the opposite panel. When you're done this, all 3 panels will be together and you are ready to baste, quilt, and bind your quilt. Now, I'm not going to show you how to do that, but I do have tutorials that walk you through all of those steps, so I will have those linked in the description down below as well. I hope you enjoyed sewing spooky applique with me, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.